Have you ever heard a story so perfect it feels like fiction? A crime so audacious, so flawlessly executed that its perpetrator simply ceases to exist? Our story begins on November 24th, 1971. It's Thanksgiving Eve. Families across America are preparing for a holiday of gratitude, gathered in the warmth of their homes. But high above them, in the stormy, freezing skies of the Pacific Northwest, a man in a dark business suit is about to commit a crime that will launch the most baffling manhunt in American history. He called himself Dan Cooper. The media would later misreport it, and he would become immortalized by a different name, D.B. Cooper. He hijacked the Boeing 727, secured a ransom of $200,000, and then, with the money strapped to his body, he parachuted from the plane's aft staircase into the middle of a raging storm over some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. And then he was gone, vanished, as if he'd stepped out of our world and into the realm of legend. For more than 50 years, the FBI and amateur sleuths have been haunted by two simple questions. Who was D.B. Cooper? And did he survive the jump? This is the story of America's only unsolved skyjacking, the decades-long hunt for a ghost, and the tantalizing new evidence that, just recently, threatens to finally solve the impossible. It all started at Portland International Airport. A man, described as being in his mid-40s, wearing a black business suit, a white shirt, and a narrow black clip-on tie, purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short 30-minute commuter flight to Seattle. He paid in cash, he checked no bags, and he gave the name Dan Cooper. He boarded the plane and took his seat, 18C, in the rear of the cabin. Witnesses, including the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, described him as quiet, polite, and unremarkable. He lit a cigarette and calmly ordered a bourbon and soda. The plane took off on time, at 2:50 p.m. As it climbed into the air, Cooper handed Schaffner a folded note. Flight attendants in that era were used to receiving phone numbers or business cards from lonely businessmen. Schaffner, assuming that's what it was, slipped the note, unread, into her purse. Cooper leaned closer. "Miss," he said, his voice low and calm, "you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. The neat, all-caps handwriting was chillingly direct. It confirmed his claim. He had a bomb in his briefcase. He instructed her to sit beside him. She did as she was told. Cooper opened his briefcase just enough for her to see what was inside. A terrifying maze of red-colored sticks, wires, and a large battery. There was no panic, no raised voices. Cooper dictated his demands. He wanted $200,000 in $20 bills. That's the equivalent of more than $1.4 million today. He also demanded 4 parachutes, 2 primary civilian-style parachutes, and 2 reserve chutes. When Schaffner asked why 4 parachutes, he was curt. "So you don't try any tricks." Then he demanded that the plane remain on the ground in Seattle to be refueled, and that a flight path be filed for Mexico City. Schaffner walked to the cockpit to relay the message. The captain, William Scott, immediately contacted Seattle-Tacoma Air Traffic Control, who in turn contacted the FBI. The president of Northwest Orient Airlines, Donald Nyrop, authorized the ransom payment, deciding it was better to lose money than to lose a plane and 36 passengers. For the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound, burning fuel to ensure a safe landing weight. On board, the passengers were simply told they were delayed due to a minor mechanical issue. They had no idea that a federal crime was in progress, just a few rows behind them. Down in Seattle, FBI agents and airline staff scrambled. They raced to gather the $200,000, photographing all 10,000 of the $20 bills to track their serial numbers. They also rushed to a local skydiving school to procure the parachutes. At 5:39 p.m., the Boeing 727 landed at SeaTac. Cooper ordered the pilot to taxi to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, away from the main terminals. The exchange was tense. An airline employee, clad only in a sweatshirt to prove he was unarmed, walked out to the plane carrying the money in a heavy bank bag and the parachutes. Cooper had the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, lower the plane's aft stairs, a unique feature of the 727, to make the trade. Once the ransom and parachutes were on board and verified, Cooper was true to his word. He released all 36 passengers and Florence Schaffner. He kept only a skeleton crew: Captain Scott, First Officer Ratatsak, Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. While the plane was being refueled, Cooper held a technical discussion with the pilots over the intercom. His requests were specific, and they revealed a shocking depth of knowledge. He instructed them to fly to Mexico City, but with specific, non-negotiable parameters. They were to fly at the minimum possible airspeed without stalling, approximately 100 knots. They were to stay below an altitude of 10,000 feet. The landing gear was to remain deployed, and the cabin was to remain unpressurized. The pilots were baffled. These instructions were bizarre, but Cooper was insistent. No games, or I'll blow the plane. What the crew realized was that Cooper's plan was precise. Flying low and slow would make a jump survivable. Keeping the landing gear down and the cabin unpressurized would ensure the aft staircase, his exit route, could be opened mid-flight. At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Seattle. A second time, D.B. Cooper, $200,000, and his 4 parachutes were now heading south into the black and stormy night. As the plane flew south, 2 F-106 fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby Air Force base to tail the airliner, but they had to keep their distance. Cooper's low-altitude flight plan meant they couldn't fly slow enough to keep a visual on the 727 without stalling. In the driving rain and thick clouds, the massive airliner was invisible. Inside the 727, Cooper ordered the last remaining crew member, Tina Mucklow, to join the rest of the pilots in the cockpit and to close the curtain. She was the last person to ever see him. At approximately 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit. It indicated that the aft staircase had been opened. The pilots, locked in the cockpit, felt a sudden change in air pressure. The plane's tail bucked slightly. Then, silence. At 8:13 p.m., over a dense, rugged, and sparsely populated forest area, somewhere between Seattle and Reno, D.B. Cooper did the impossible. He stepped off the stairs of a commercial jetliner into a 200-mile-per-hour wind, into a freezing cold rainstorm with a wind chill far below zero. He fell into total darkness, into history, and into legend. The pilots continued to fly, unaware of exactly when he had jumped. They landed the plane safely in Reno, Nevada, just after 10:15 p.m. The aircraft was immediately surrounded by FBI agents, state police, and airport security. They stormed the plane, weapons drawn. They found it empty. The cabin was quiet. Cooper's bourbon glasses were on the tray table. His cigarettes were in the ashtray. On his seat, he had left behind his black clip-on tie and 2 of the 4 parachutes. The money was gone, and so was D.B. Cooper. The investigation, codenamed NORJAK by the FBI, began immediately. It would become one of the longest, most expensive, and most frustrating investigations in the Bureau's history. The first problem was the sheer scale of the search area. The pilots only knew that Cooper jumped sometime after 8 p.m. in a 25-mile-wide flight path over southwest Washington. This was thousands of square miles of dense forest, mountains, and rivers. The FBI, along with over 1,000 Army troops, conducted one of the largest ground searches ever mounted. They scoured the forest floor foot by foot. They searched from the air with helicopters. They even brought in a submarine to search the depths of Lake Merwin, a large reservoir along the flight path. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no money. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The FBI was left with only 2 pieces of physical evidence. The first was the black clip-on tie he'd left behind. For decades, it offered no leads. But in 2009, new technology allowed a team of citizen scientists, organized by researcher Tom Kay, to analyze the tie with an electron microscope. What they found was fascinating. The tie was covered with thousands of particles, including rare, pure titanium and bismuth. These were not common elements in 1971. They were, however, used in very specific high-tech industries, like aerospace manufacturing, perhaps at a company like Boeing, or in chemical plants. The tie suggested Cooper wasn't just a common criminal. He might have been an engineer, a manager, or a contractor in the aviation world. This supported what the pilots already knew. This man understood the Boeing 727. The second piece of evidence wouldn't surface for 9 years. In February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on a family picnic digging in the sand on a riverbank of the Columbia River at a place called Tana Bar. His fingers brushed against something. It was 3 rotting bundles of cash. He and his family turned them over to the FBI. The serial numbers were a perfect match. It was $5,800 of D.B. Cooper's ransom money. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. Tana Bar was miles downstream from the official search zone. How did the money get there? Geologists determined the money, which was still bound in the original rubber bands, must have washed the shore, not been buried. This suggested it had been carried down the river system, which in turn suggested Cooper must have landed in or near a tributary of the Columbia River. But why was only $5,800 found? What happened to the other $194,200? And what did this mean for Cooper himself? If the money washed downstream, it's almost certain the man who was attached to it did as well. This find solidified the FBI's long-held belief. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the active NORJAK investigation. Their conclusion: D.B. Cooper almost certainly died during the jump. They argued that no experienced parachutist would have attempted a jump in such dangerous conditions. The weather was brutal. He was in a business suit, not survival gear. And, in a final ironic twist, the primary parachute he chose to use was a training chute, an older model that was not designed for a high-speed jump and was not steerable. The reserve chute he took was a dummy. It had been sewn shut and was intended only for classroom demonstrations. The FBI believes D.B. Cooper, blinded by the storm and unable to control his descent, likely perished on impact or died of exposure in the freezing wilderness. His body and the rest of the money simply lost to the elements. Case closed. But for the rest of the world, the case was wide open. You cannot have a mystery of this magnitude without suspects. The FBI investigated over 1,000, but a few names have always risen to the top. The first, and for a long time the most compelling, was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. McCoy was a Vietnam veteran, a Green Beret, and an experienced paratrooper. Just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy pulled off an almost identical crime. He hijacked a plane, demanded $500,000, and parachuted out the back. The similarities were uncanny. But McCoy made mistakes. He left evidence, and he was quickly captured. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. When asked if he was Cooper, McCoy always denied it, purportedly saying, "Cooper messed it up. I did it better." In 1974, McCoy escaped from prison, only to be killed in a shootout with the FBI. For decades, the FBI officially ruled him out. His physical description didn't quite match, and he had a confirmed alibi for the night of the Cooper hijacking. But in 2024, the case took a stunning turn. The media organization The Guardian reported that the children of Richard McCoy had come forward with a new claim. They stated their father was D.B. Cooper, that his alibi was a lie, and that as children they had found a parachute in their garage that they believed he used. They have reportedly turned this parachute over to the FBI, prompting renewed interest in a suspect long thought to be a dead end. Then there's Kenneth Christensen, a former Army paratrooper who later worked for Northwest Airlines as a purser. He was familiar with the 727, he drank bourbon, he smoked, and his appearance was a strong match for the composite sketches. On his deathbed, he reportedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." His brother became convinced he was Cooper, but the FBI found no hard evidence. Critically, Christensen's DNA did not match the partial profile found on Cooper's tie. And finally, there is Walter Recca, another former military paratrooper. His family came forward after his death, claiming he had confessed to them multiple times, providing intricate details of the hijacking that had never been made public. According to Recca's story, he landed near the town of Cleveland, Washington, far to the east of the official search zone. This, his supporters argue, is why the FBI never found a single trace of him. He simply wasn't where they were looking. So what is the truth? Did D.B. Cooper die in the wilderness, a victim of his own hubris, his skeleton and his stolen fortune slowly being reclaimed by the forest? Or did he, against all odds, survive? Did a highly skilled paratrooper, an aerospace insider, or a military veteran pull off the perfect crime, land safely, and simply walk away, living out the rest of his days in quiet anonymity? The legend of D.B. Cooper endures. Not just because the crime was unsolved, but because it was audacious. In an age of growing disillusionment, this polite, calm man in a business suit became an anti-establishment folk hero. He took on the system and won. Or at least he never got caught. The new claims surrounding Richard McCoy Jr. remind us that this 50-year-old story is not finished. The files may be closed, but the case is not. Somewhere out there, the truth is waiting. Perhaps in a newly discovered parachute, in a DNA sequence, or still buried beneath the sands of a lonely riverbank.